And welcome to 25 Lessons on Leadership. My name is Dean West. I'm president of Association Laboratory and its founder. In 1999, 25 years ago, we started the company here in Chicago. I'm excited to welcome Joel Albizo, who's CEO of the American Planning Association and arguably one of the more accomplished association leaders in our sector. I've been watching him give speeches from stage for many years. Our goal today on 25 Lessons in Leadership is frankly to hear what some of our most seasoned folks, and I of course say seasoned with nothing but respect, Joel, seasoned folks think about the future of our profession. What's going to be different? What's going to be similar? In things of that nature. And with luck, by the end of the year, when we've completed the series of interviews, we're going to learn some things. And if not, it's fun just learning what our colleagues and peers do in the industry. With that, Joel, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Well, thank you, Dean. First of all, thank you for the very kind words. I always enjoy talking to you. You are so well regarded in our space, and I think I can always count on hearing a different perspective and being challenged, and that's so important for us today. As you said, I am the Chief Executive Officer of the American Planning Association, which of course refers to urban planning, urban and community planning. We have about 40,000 members, mostly in the US, but also, probably 50 or 60 countries around the world. So we are the largest organization of urban and community planners in the world. So that's kind of a cool thing. We're, I think we consider ourselves to be a big tent. Planning is a very varied and diverse profession. There are lots of different ways to do planning, from your traditional city planner, planning director, to a consultant, to people that specialize in a small aspect of planning. More and more in the area of technology now, but it's pretty exciting. Obviously, challenges that cities and communities are having today with housing, maybe at the very top of that. We know housing affordability and choice is a huge problem and one of our priorities. So, the job keeps me very busy, keeps me very excited and energized, and I really look forward to coming into work every day. And I always think that that's a pretty cool thing. And as you said, I do like to, we all do this job differently. And I like to think that I'm also one of those people that does it a little differently. I tend to sort of not go with the flow, and that sometimes that works out great, sometimes okay, and sometimes not at all, but that's just the way I do it. So happy to be here.
Oh, glad to have you. I a couple of years ago, more than a couple, frankly, we did a study of association leaders, and one of the things that really stood out for me out of this study was how interesting they thought the job was. So, kind of to kick us off, when you think of just your association career, what is the thing you found just most interesting about it? The thing you kind of, like, I never thought about it. And I'll give you an example from Association Laboratory's perspective. I see behind the curtain on all these different industries and professions. You sit at a board, people who look at their industry or profession all these different ways, and you just learn about it. And so after 25 years, I can talk intelligently about 100 different industries, as long as no one from the actual industry is there. But it's just fascinating to learn how all this stuff works. And to give you a sense of it, our clients go from the American College of Surgeons to the Institute of Makers of Explosives. So you get a sense of the breadth of things you learn about. So what have you found most interesting about your career in association management?
Yeah, I think for me, I have learned that I'm a very curious person, and probably sometime annoyingly so, if you ask folks around me. But it's just part of my DNA. I'm very, very curious. And I think that my association career has fed that intellectual curiosity. To this day, every day, no day is ever routine. No activity year is ever routine. And for me, that's a big part of, there are many other things probably, but I think that's the thing, probably more than anything, that uniquely energizes me, because like you, I've served a lot of different kinds of trades, professions, causes, et cetera, both as a as a association manager as well as a volunteer.
Joel, you can just say the big money. That's okay. Just say you got into it for the money. Let's, you know.
That actually didn't come to mind, and we could have a whole nother conversation about that. That might be a different show.
Yeah, well, yeah. What really got you involved in association management? Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I cold called for a job. My dad was a state representative, and I cold called and got a job at the Iowa Medical Society because
Huh.
no one else would hire me. I'm now 59 years old, and no one's ever tried to recruit me. So that'll give you a sense of my background. Um, on a kind of a more serious note, into some of the more official questions, a little bit, Joel.
Sure.
We're releasing our 10th sector study this week, and one of the things that really stands out for me is how associations and leaders, both volunteer and staff, really operate in just a boundaryless world. The movement of money, the movement of information, the ability to communicate across state, provincial, national boundaries is routine now. I actually think one of the big implications of AI is less the technology side and more of the democratization of power side. You can now in normal human English use the phenomenal processing power of technology. And so when you project out, 10, 15, 20 years and look back at today, are there some things that you think, frankly, are going to be obsolete, things that are going to change in just a very startling manner for the association community and its leaders?
Yeah, well, I would first of all, I would say that this question would have been a lot easier to answer prior to 2020. Um, I don't think, anyone expected the wild card that we would see, in 2020. And I think that changed things so fundamentally from, as a society, certainly as from an economic perspective, certainly from how one operates, an enterprise, any type of enterprise that relies on, that has a business model, an economic foundation. So, as far as looking ahead 20 years, I don't know that I have a crystal ball that can do that, but I do think in order to do that, if we want to take that as hypothetical, we'd have to, I think, first of all, make some pretty big assumptions, such as present trends continuing. And we said something, or you said something earlier in just kind of the lead in about our conversation before the chat about legacy practices, and that is one of the things that's holding us back. And I agree. I think legacy practices are holding us back. I would also say that I think that pursuing a hoped for future, to me, can also be tricky. So here's where I'm going. I think you asked a question about what would be startling. And I underline that word. I think what would be startling, in my mind, is that if association leadership changed less radically than some might expect or hope for. I still think that as long as there is this critical balance to be achieved between business focus, because let's face it, that's got to work.
Sure. Yeah.
And we know what happens when that doesn't work. Social focus, and we know that most of our associations have an important social focus, certainly our C3s, and a political focus. And I mean by political, I mean internal politics. And I don't think we can forget or minimize the role and the impact of internal politics and on how organizations operate. As much as you had mentioned, I think an example of a trade show or a meeting, and if we had it to do all over again, would we do it differently? Well, I think everybody would say no. But one of the realities that I think we have to take into account with all kinds of systems and programs, including big, flagship meetings and money-making, revenue-generating events, is that there is a large political element tied to those. I mean, some of the most consequential things that we've done here at APA have come at great, I think, great cost, with great friction. So, I think again, as long as association leadership involves that, finding that shifting balance between business focus, social focus, and political focus, I think there's always going to be a dynamic that is going to moderate, against radical change. Of course, I think, as I said earlier, the one thing that we never expected was COVID-19. And if we did, we certainly didn't plan for it, most of us. And, I don't know what other wild cards there could be, and it's certainly
Sure.
possible could be a wild card that would absolutely turn our profession on its head. But no, I think this most startling change would be in 20 years that we've changed a lot, but less radically than we might think, expect, or hope for.
So at some level, some of the basic components of the business model, the basic components of leadership, you would expect to still be relevant 20 years from now. Maybe we're playing ball on a different field, but we're still playing ball, so to speak, to use a sports metaphor.
As long as there is somebody who has a influence base,
Sure.
who sees things differently and can act on it and can generate support or energy, everything else has to be sort of worked through. So
Yeah.
I don't know how you take that element out of what we do.
Excellent. That means I will still be relevant in 20 years because I'll still be, working hard to pay off
Absolutely.
my visa
That
bill with
I'm
that
sure.
safety.
That I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's
I keep hoping to be replaced by AI and I can't quite manage it yet. So just a quick follow-up question on that, Joel.
sure.
You talked a little bit about legacy structures and things of
Yep.
that nature. If I gave you the magic wand and you could get rid of something from the past that you find is more of a barrier to future success, what would you get rid of and why? Don't say your president. Don't say your president.
Well, I think, I think that, yeah, I think it would be great if associations had made more progress, including ours, had made more progress in the evolution of governance. I think we all talk about it. We all are working, well, many of us are working at it. It's hard.
Right.
It costs, it has a real cost to it. You spend a huge amount of political capital trying to do it. Sometimes some of us pay with our jobs, but it's just so important to, in order to enable the kind of agility, responsiveness, adaptation that we evolve these governance structures.
Sure.
So that's it. That is the structure that I think if we could just, snap our fingers and have that replaced, I think that's what we would do. I think, just in terms of, I'll bring this back to, the personal individual aspect. If you talk about like a leadership trait, which is, I think, something you had referred to, and the question of what leadership trait might become obsolete and what might replace it. I thought about that a little bit, and I think that it might be the visionary leader. I should air quote that, the
Yeah.
visionary.
Understood.
I just don't see how one person can see the future, particularly in the world we live in today, or we should expect that person to see the future and have that vision drive the enterprise. I think it's a much more dynamic thing than that. And I think that somebody, in terms of what might replace it, I was thinking that somebody can kind of sense, analyze, obviously, engage the right and combine the right talents and perspectives into something, magical, something that creates value would be ideal. And I was searching for a word that would be very incongruous with the way we talk in our circles, and I came up with the word alchemist.
Yeah,
And the definition of an alchemist is a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination. Uh, when I try to describe what we do, what I do, and you and others do in these enterprises, it looks an awful lot like that. So, you know, that's sort of what I'm thinking. But this idea that you have a strong leader who has a vision, who can drive that vision, I'm just not seeing it in the world that we have now, in the world that we're
sure.
leading into.
Joel, let me challenge you a little bit on that. It's
Sure,
not as strong a challenge as it's going to sound. So it's more of a question than a
sure.
challenge. So you and I both been in association management long enough to kind of watch the evolution of the association CEO.
Yep.
And nearly 40 years ago when I started, well, that was hard to say out loud. Nearly 40 years ago when I started, um, there was a strong undercurrent of the executive director as a manager of the business. And it varied by profession, it varied by organization. And then there was the term servant leadership became very prevalent, where you are servant of the board, but the board really directs things. And I don't mean in a
Mhm.
tactical way,
Yeah.
but and then over time, and you see it in the changes in titles, you move from executive directors to executive vice president to chief executive officer and president, things of that nature, as the chief of staff officer took more of a leadership role and more of a directive role of the organization. So what I'm hearing from you is you see that trend. Maybe that isn't a trend, or may not be continuing because that's not the position that or the role of the position itself. So could you clarify? I don't know if that's a challenge or not. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. No, I should first probably qualify that, I'm engaging in huge generalization.
No, understood. Yeah,
I think you have to to
yeah.
to
We're not going to test you on this, Joel.
to
So it's
sort of
okay.
to sort of play the game. But yeah, I think that every situation will be different. And I also think that, and again, everybody's got a different way of thinking about this. I think that leadership in this kind of a role has to be very situational. You
Okay.
need to, um, there is time for collaboration. There's time for decentralized decision making. You have to find the right balance. You have to
Sure.
have relationships. You have to have trust and all these things. So, there are times when you absolutely need to have some clarity, communicate that clarity, be persistent, be tough, and stick it out. And
Yeah.
sometimes, take your medicine. But I think that increasingly, with the complexity of what we're dealing with, including the workforce, I think that people that are orchestrators of talent and these very productive collaborations uh, are bring something unique to the role. And I think that possibly you're going to see more and more of that in the future, as opposed to the here I am, here's the vision, let's go. So,
Yeah.
but there are times when you do need to be that stand-up person.
What I'm hearing actually, and I agree with it. So is, and I think it's one of the things that makes association leadership actually so enjoyable and such a rewarding career is it's like this
Sure.
Venn diagram of leadership. You've
Yep.
got your kind of traditional staff leadership where you've got your explicit position at the top of whatever hierarchy you're responsible for. You've got a manager of a peer-to-peer leadership environment with your board and your committees and things of that nature. You've got a collaborative leadership environment when you work with other, maybe it's chapters, maybe it's partners, whatever it might be. And so when you look at the future as a leader, it's how do you identify and navigate these different leadership environments, knowing full well that between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. you'll be in all. It's like learning, three different swimming strokes or some equivalent thing to try and find a metaphor.
It is, I was just thinking about this today, in terms of just thinking about components. And You could apply this to anything, but I think, and this gets back to the premise of what we enjoy, what many of us enjoy about this work, this career, and the intellectual curiosity and the never dull moment. Um, you know, uh, you really have to think on your feet. You really have to think on your feet, and there are times when uh, you need to be collaborative, you need to be pragmatic. There are times when you need to just lay down the law and really stick to it, and those approaches can be miles apart, and
Sure.
you have to do those in the same day, and then you've got to make the judgment of which is appropriate, and it's happening in a constantly shifting you know, shifting winds. So yeah, I think you described it well, and it also made me think about the question of what is an effective CEO anyway? Is it somebody with a long tenure? Is it somebody who has grown an organization? Is it somebody that has achieved notoriety? Is it somebody whose organization has done something really high profile and unique relative to the mission? A combination of those,
Yeah,
or all
all of
of
the
them.
above. Sure.
I don't know, but if your goal is long tenure, that takes you down a different path.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I want to camp on that a little bit and kind of lead into
Yeah,
this, which is we designed the emerging leader program for one of our clients a couple of years ago, and what was interesting to me was one of their questions was what's the leadership environment
yeah,
we're teaching you to be an emerging leader in. So is it at work? Is it within the association and within the broader profession, et cetera? And eventually the research identified 5 different domains and on how to do that. But it's the longevity question, I think, then becomes interesting, which is one is you have to navigate all these different domains, any one of which can trip you up. And so if you start looking at longevity as your goal, or you start, and I'll come back to the measures of it, you start to be so risk averse
yeah,
that you've kept your
absolutely.
job, but you haven't actually accomplished anything. And where I hear that sometimes out of our colleagues, Joel, is you ask them about their association, and they're all bureaucratic measurements. It's how many staff they boss around, it's how big their budget is. It's not, we've doubled membership, we achieved our mission, or like they're not
Yeah,
output or outcome focused
yeah,
goals. And so you talk to some of the folks with more bureaucratic measures, and again, it's a skill set to keep your job at an association for 30 years. I'm not saying you don't have to know what you're doing by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm curious about that balancing act between kind of an aggressive risk taking, maybe an investment mindset, I sometimes call it,
yeah,
with a very risk averse kind of managerial mindset, for lack of a better phrase. How do you
yeah,
balance that kind of shifting need for that strong individual
yeah,
and
and
the
that's
decentralized?
why I think the word sensing comes to mind. You have to be a good sensor of when you've pushed too far, or how far you can push, or when you need to allow things to stabilize. And because clearly, I totally agree with you. I think if your objective is to just hang on, you're going to make a series of decisions that are going to come back to bite you in the organization. On the other hand, and we've all seen this, if you push too hard and too fast and you're not a good reader of the room, let's say, you may not be around long enough to actually see through important change, or if you are, you might be diminished in some way. So it is a real, I think, art to doing this. And it's certainly not, I have found in any way, it's not a straight line. Um, and sometimes, I think our role is kind of picking people up when they're in a trough as a result of a setback when you're trying to bring about meaningful change. Because I
Sure.
just don't see any big meaningful change that is going to come without those setbacks. And yeah, it's
Well, it's
again,
also not going. It's also not going to come in 3 months. I think that's the other thing is you need some patience. That this is going to take some time, and I come on camp on that a little bit. But one
yep,
of the things, when I talk to volunteer leaders, we naturally get brought on with, because people are trying to do some big thing. Okay. And so you're talking to leaders who've decided to do something different, knowing
Yep.
full well that if it works a couple of years from now, no one will ever know they were part of it. And you can see kind of their frustration is like, yeah, we're like one of our global clients, they're writing big checks to expand globally. And maybe it'll work, maybe not. In a couple of years, when they discover it did work, no one's going to remember the board that got it going. And so there's this, I think, a mindset out of volunteer leaders, and it's not a hostile, malicious mindset. They're all trying to do great work, but what do I get applauded for this year? It's my term on the board. It's my term as president. I want an accomplishment that I can attach to me, and that's not a bad motivation. But I think it gets counter to this kind of investment mindset where do we need to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? How do you balance that as a CEO?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. And I wish I wish I knew of a easy a direct answer to it. I think it's just really, really hard to do. I think it takes constant sensing, listening, getting other perspectives, having people on the team that are going to give you a good reflection of of the environment. We're not going to sense and see everything. But yeah, the leaders, no matter how well they're selected or oriented, they want uh, again, I had a boss one time, a really great mentor, and he once said to me, you got to remember that people that are association leaders sometimes are standing in the brightest light they're ever going to stand in, and
It's a
and they
great
want
quote.
to and they want to make it count. And you know what? That is so true. And I think we all want to have some sense of satisfaction. And I have used the phrase "speed up to slow down," and those kinds of things. Sometimes too many times. You have to be kind of wise about how many times you say things like that. But it's true. But it's so true. And so I guess to your question, it's again a judgment call. It's a balancing act.
Yeah,
It's how do you achieve a practical balance between doing the hard work, much of which is going to go unnoticed and unseen by members and by peers, and have the and feel good that as a volunteer that you are doing the hard work that's going to make your successor and our successors more effective, and doing things that you get credit for, doing things that
sure.
you enjoy, doing things that where you're going to get that pat on the back. It's extremely difficult. I think the art is to try to align them so that the pats on the back are related to something strategic and not something just, you know,
I
good.
find that kind of when I think of my own career, one of my very first bosses, so I'm a young 20 something, in central Iowa, and I'll still remember this phrase. And I can't remember how it came up, but he told me this: you have to subvert your ego. That
Oh,
it's not about you, it's about the committee, it's about I was a lobbyist, it's about the state representative, wherever it is. And that I thought that's good. But I've never until this call, I've never put this together later on in Chicago, I was before Association Laboratory. I was walking to the gentleman who'd been chancellor of the University of Virginia, and I'm in my late 20s now, and I'm at my most egotistical. I would submit. You're really starting to go up the ladder. Everything's working. You're so sure of your knowledge at that age. I used to kid that your late 20s is like a teenage boy. You know everything, but have experience with nothing. So I became a consultant. But I also remember he said this to me, and I can't remember how I was negotiating a contract with him, and I look back on it now of how patient he was with this kid he was negotiating with. Again, he'd run a major university, and all of a sudden he's stuck negotiating this agreement with some 27-year-old, and and he was a good person. He became a mentor of mine, I think, without realizing it, or I just didn't think of it at the time. But he talked about how you have to work for what you want out of it, not work for other people's recognition of it. And his whole point was, at the end of the day, if you don't like what you're doing, if you don't like your performance, if you don't like what you're accomplishing, it's not someone else's fault for not giving you a plaque. or someone else's fault for putting you in the newspaper. You have to work for what you want. And I thought that was a good way of framing it, which is you set your personal vision of whatever you want to do, and then you work it, and you don't worry about if Joel gives you a plaque or someone
Yeah.
writes you a check or something like that. And I thought it was an interesting, it was a useful, I think, backstop to the subvert your ego thing.
Yeah, that is a good way of thinking of it. I mean, I kind of have come to the place where I try to fix on a higher but simple, set of drivers, purpose. And to me, it's really kind of two things. One is that I used to sort of uh, test or validate, what makes sense and what doesn't. One is, am I creating more mission impact? I mean, the reality is that our businesses, our enterprises are essentially created to, certainly the C3s, for around a mission.
Sure.
And that's what we're here for. We're created, around a mission. So we want to create as much mission impact as we can. That's our purpose. If it were returning, value to shareholders, that would, or whatever, that would be
Yeah,
something
pick
different.
your metric. Sure.
Yeah. So to me, that's the big thing. That's why we're all here. And we're really not here for any other reason. And the other one that I think about is making the organization stronger, making the team stronger and the people within it. So those are sort of my two guiding stars, that the principles that I sort of look at. And not only are they aligned, and do they connect and reinforce each other. I think for me anyway, I enjoy them, particularly the part about building the team.
Yeah.
So that if what you're doing is building, let's say you have a leader, an elected leader who wants to be on, to have visibility. Well, if that helps to drive our strategy, great. If that makes that person more confident, more capable as a leader of our enterprise, and is more willing to do the hard work, um, great. I think we're hitting on both of those. So I mean, that's just kind of the way I
Yeah,
think about it.
I
You know,
agree with that too, because I would not have said it about myself 30 years ago, but I noticed that that creation of the infrastructure, that creation of that team environment is just more interesting to me, and more kind of personally satisfying. The way I've
people.
described it is, yeah, well, the way I've described it is how to use the company for your own, as a platform for your own success. And maybe you'll be here a year, maybe you'll be here 20 years, but this is an
Couldn't
opportunity
agree
to
more.
use, yeah, do whatever you want.
Could,
And if you
couldn't
want to try
agree
something,
more.
come and talk to me. And let's see.
Couldn't
If we
couldn't
can't get it
agree
done, we
couldn't
can't get it
agree
done.
more. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 a hard thing to do, because one thing that I've found is that you have to kind of subordinate your own ego, your own brand a little bit to build up other people. And occasionally we do have to answer those questions of, now, what is it exactly you do? Because your staff is amazing. But behind all of this, look at the progress we're making. Look at what we're
Yeah.
doing. That didn't happen by accident. So
Yeah.
I feel good about that.
I was laughing a couple years ago. It was late summer, and I've tried to secretly retire for a month every summer. I've made some progress on that. You just kind of come in a little later, you leave a little earlier, and make up a bunch of time traveling for work lives. And
That's a
yeah,
good, I gotta
and
write that down.
but I was trying this, and I remember talking to the wife of a friend of mine who is an executive, and I was kind of nervous. I go, I just, like, I'm getting to work at 9, and I'm getting up in the morning at paddle boarding. I'm like, I'm just like, I don't feel like I'm working that hard, and it's kind of making me nervous. And she had a great insight for me, and she goes, "That's the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed. Everything isn't supposed to be an emergency. You shouldn't have to be working 12-hour days. That means your capacity's screwed up. You shouldn't be in constant crisis mode." When your team's working effectively, for us as a consulting firm, we were getting clients, we were producing client work. None of it was an emergency. It was all going pretty smoothly. That's how it's supposed to be. And I thought that was kind of an interesting take on it. So of course I tried it for another month, and that didn't work. But but like you get a sense, I think, culturally when things are kind of operating, and it doesn't mean you're not busy. It doesn't mean there isn't work to be done, but it you feel like you're making progress. And I think that kind of cultural attitude is fun when you find it or create it.
It's a great point that you bring up, because I think if we wanted to, we could find a crisis every day.
Oh yeah,
And sometimes maybe what we do have to do is to really ask, is this really a crisis? I mean, is this first of all, is it a crisis?
yeah. Is it a crisis? Yeah,
I mean, because I think sometimes we have something that is, let's say, performing at a suboptimal level. Maybe it's there's some friction, maybe there's a little dust up. Is it a crisis? Everything can't be a crisis.
yeah,
And I think, but this is one of the difficult things that I think a lot of times falls most heavily on the CEO, is to determine what's a crisis.
sure. That's a great point. Yeah, I think part of this comes with age. You realize that misspelled word or the stuff that really bothers. And again, it's not that you shouldn't pay attention to detail, all this kind of stuff. But some of the stuff you thought was a big deal just really wasn't. I kind of joke people don't come to us for an emergency strategic plan, and no one's going to remember 5 years from now if you got done in April instead of May. So when you think of some of the kind of artificial timeframes, the artificial urgency on stuff that frankly would be accomplished better if you're more deliberative about it, I think managing that with your volunteers and your staff becomes much more important. My last official question,
Yep.
Joel, because I know you've got work you get paid money to do. Um, you know, this is clearly a very open-ended question.
Yeah.
If you had advice to the 30, 40 somethings in our profession, that next executive class, like you're much older than I am. So, you're not going to be around forever. I'm getting older.
Oh, I'm
This,
way older than you.
yeah, much substantively older. But what's the book? My book will be Race to Retirement. Like if you had advice to kind of that 34, that next executive class on how to stay relevant, given some of the things you and I have talked about, given some of the changes in the world within which their members operate, are there two or three things, pearls of wisdom you would recount to them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can decide whether this is wisdom or not. These are just three thoughts that have sort of guided me, and I've sort of become more aware of in hindsight. When the first is, just the idea that you really can and should learn from everyone, and do it constantly. I think that that is spans across every dimension. The one
Sure.
that we think of most is age. So, I think, for example, people that are in late career, let's say in the CEO space, have been maybe had more experiences, let's just say, in dealing with those political issues, those internal
Yeah.
politics,
The
those
human issues.
difficult people issues that have nothing to do with smarts or competence or knowledge of other, of any aspect of the business. So, and it goes the other way too. So I think number one is might be cliche, but be open to learning from everyone, and realize that every day is you're going to learn something new. And then the second one is, I think that to really, to really get a handle on who you are, and I don't mean in a philosophical
Sure.
sense, or your worldview. I'm talking more from a sort of a professional application sense. Like, what are your talents? What are you good at? What are you naturally good at?
Yeah.
And yes, your values certainly come into play there, but understand who you are. I know when we were all kind of struggling through the pandemic, and there were really no answers, no playbook. We didn't know what the next day was going to bring. We had nothing to lean on, but ultimately we had to sort of default back to who we were. Like, what do you think is right? What makes sense in your head and your heart and your gut?
Sure.
And then I think the third element is, it's funny. Somebody once said to me, one of our colleagues, somebody that we both know, said to me a long time ago, and I didn't really know how to take it. This person said, Joel is one of the most balanced CEOs that I know. And I thought, wait a minute, is that a compliment? And maybe I was still
I'm
at the point where I
not sure
thought,
what I would say to that either. Thank you. Yeah.
maybe that means that I didn't work hard enough, but now I get it. And as it turns out, I think whether I set out to be balanced, I do think that I maintain some balance. And so I think we're always striving to figure out what that balance is, but I do think that's important. It can't be, yes, it's going to consume you in a lot of ways, but it can't be your whole being. And so I think those are things that I think are going to enable people to see this job as not just something that I've got to, set the world on fire in 10 years. Look at this for the long haul,
Yeah.
and is going to enable you to sort of stick with it, to learn, to fail, to learn from that, to get better, and ultimately to be the most effective CEO you can be and have a good life while you're doing it.
Great advice. Also, again, there's nothing wrong with a lifetime of interesting work, and you'll find the money you need, you'll find the
Absolutely.
friends you need. But yeah, when I think of how much fun I've had over the last, couple of decades working in associations, fun I never anticipated. I've seen things I never anticipated seeing. Worked with great people, and yeah, every career has its ups and downs. I'm not saying you won't fail, but it's an amazing place to make a living. So many different ways to make a living in our sector. And I think that's a great positive note to end on. Joel, I really want to thank you for being part of 25 Lessons in Leadership. It's frankly just fun hearing the advice and counsel of friends across the industry, seeing what they see and hearing what they hear. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate it. And have a great day and a great week, and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Dean. Great talking to you as well.